In the small town of Redwood, California, on March 15, 2022, local police received an anonymous call. The caller reported a suspicious relationship between 42-year-old Martha Thompson and her 19-year-old son Jason. The call came from a neighbor who overheard a conversation between Martha and Jason, the content of which raised serious concerns. Redwood police officers, Detectives Sarah Lewis and Michael Rodriguez, were assigned to investigate the case. They began by interviewing neighbors and gathering preliminary information about the Thompson family. It turned out that Martha was a single mother who had been raising Jason since he was a young child. Neighbors described them as a quiet, religious family who rarely drew attention to themselves. On their first visit to the Thompson home, detectives found no obvious signs of illegal activity. Martha and Jason behaved calmly and confidently, denying any allegations of inappropriate behavior. However, detectives noticed some oddities in the mother and son's behavior that prompted them to investigate further. Further investigation included interviews with family friends, Martha's co-workers, and Jason's classmates. Gradually, a picture began to emerge of an unusual and disturbing relationship between mother and son. Several witnesses reported seeing Martha and Jason holding hands or exchanging kisses beyond the normal family displays of affection. Detectives Lewis and Rodriguez decided to deepen the investigation by requesting a search warrant for the Thompsons' home and access to their electronic devices. The evidence obtained from the search shocked even seasoned investigators. Love letters, intimate photographs, and videos were discovered that clearly indicated a sexual relationship between Martha and Jason. Martha Thompson was born in 1980 to a religious family in a small town in Northern California. Her parents were members of a small Christian community known for its conservative views and literal interpretation of the Bible. Martha grew up in a strict atmosphere where great emphasis was placed on religious education and adherence to traditional family values. At the age of 22, Martha married Eric Thompson, a young man from the same religious community. Their marriage was organized by the elders of the community and was considered an ideal union. Soon after the wedding, however, it became clear that the relationship between the couple was not an easy one. Eric turned out to be a man with a rigid character and a tendency to be controlling. He often criticized Martha for the slightest misdeeds and insisted on complete submission to his will. A year after the wedding, in 2003, Martha and Eric had a son, Jason. The appearance of the child did not improve relations in the family. Eric showed little interest in the upbringing of his son, preferring to spend time outside the house. Martha, on the other hand, devoted herself entirely to taking care of Jason, finding it a consolation from her failed marriage. At the same time, a neighbor of the Thompson family, 56-year-old Robert Anderson, began to notice strange behavior between Martha and Jason. Living in a neighboring house, he repeatedly saw the mother and son exchanging intimate gestures not typical of normal family relationships. One evening, while walking his dog, Anderson overheard through an open window a conversation between Martha and Jason, the content of which shocked him. Anderson, tormented by doubts, hesitated for several days before deciding to act. Eventually, a sense of civic duty prevailed, and he called the police anonymously to report his suspicions. After receiving 2 independent signals of a possible crime, the Redwood Police Department began an active investigation. Detectives Sarah Lewis and Michael Rodriguez were put in charge of the case. They began by cautiously gathering information, interviewing neighbors and acquaintances of the Thompson family. The detectives' first visit to the Thompson home yielded no apparent results. Martha and Jason denied any accusations, claiming that their relationship was normal and legal. However, the experienced detectives noticed signs of nervousness and inconsistencies in the statements of mother and son. Crucial to the investigation was obtaining a warrant to search the home and seize the family's electronic devices. The search uncovered love letters written by Martha to Jason, as well as intimate photographs and videos. Analysis of computers and smartphones revealed correspondence of a sexual nature between mother and son. In addition, Martha's personal diary, found during the search, contain detailed entries about the development of their relationship with Jason, including religious justifications for their bond. These materials provided irrefutable evidence of the criminal nature of the relationship between Martha and Jason. After discovering the incontrovertible evidence, detectives Lewis and Rodriguez began a more intensive phase of the investigation. They conducted repeated interviews with Martha and Jason, this time separately. Faced with the physical evidence, Martha changed her position. She admitted to having a sexual relationship with her son, but continued to insist that their liaison was blessed by God and was not a crime. Jason, being away from his mother's influence, began to gradually realize the abnormality of the situation. During lengthy conversations with a psychologist involved in the investigation, he described years of manipulation by Martha. It turned out that his mother had systematically isolated him from the outside world, restricted his communication with his peers, and instilled distorted ideas about normal family relationships. When Jason was 5 years old, Eric abruptly left the family. He left town, leaving no address or contact information. Martha was left alone with a young son in her arms, without financial support or emotional support. This period was a turning point in Martha's life. She was forced to leave the religious community, which had condemned her for the breakdown of her marriage, and start an independent life. Martha moved to Redwood, where she found a job as an accountant for a small company. She focused entirely on raising Jason, trying to give him everything she had been deprived of as a child. The relationship between mother and son was very close. Jason grew up an obedient and attached boy to his mother with no other significant adults in his life. As Jason grew older, the relationship between him and Martha became increasingly unhealthy. Martha, deprived of emotional support and romantic relationships after her husband's departure, began to seek solace in spending time with her son. She increasingly turned to Jason for emotional support, sharing her problems and worries with him, which was not in keeping with a normal mother-child relationship. When Jason turned 16, the situation began to spiral out of control. Martha, who was in a deep emotional crisis, began to take an unhealthy interest in her son. She began making ambiguous comments about his appearance and physical development, which caused the teenager embarrassment and discomfort. During this period, Martha turned to religion again, but her interpretation of biblical texts was distorted and dangerous. She began to convince herself and Jason that their intimacy was approved by God, citing selective quotations from the Old Testament. Martha manipulated religious texts to justify her inappropriate actions and desires. The first physical contact occurred when Jason was 17 years old. Martha, while intoxicated, kissed her son on the lips. Jason, shocked and confused, did not know how to react. He had been raised in an atmosphere of total submission to his mother and could not resist her actions. After this incident, Martha began to initiate physical contact with Jason on a regular basis. She convinced her son that their relationship was special and blessed from above. Jason, isolated from his peers and with no experience of normal romantic relationships, gradually succumbed to his mother's manipulations. By Jason's 18th birthday, their relationship had developed into a full-fledged sexual relationship. Martha continued to use religious arguments to justify her actions, claiming that their union was pure before God. She forbade Jason from telling anyone about their relationship, citing that those around them would not understand their special bond. Jason, deeply traumatized and confused, began to experience serious psychological problems. He became withdrawn, avoided socializing with his peers, and hardly ever left the house except to attend classes at the local college. His academic performance deteriorated dramatically, which attracted the attention of his professors. The first suspicion of trouble in the Thompson family came to the attention of a psychology professor at the college where Jason was attending. Professor Elizabeth Green drew attention to the unusual behavior of the student. He was withdrawn, avoided contact with classmates, and showed signs of depression. During one of his classes on family relationships, Jason suddenly burst into tears and ran out of the classroom. Professor Green attempted to talk to Jason privately, but he adamantly refused to discuss his family situation. However, his reaction and some reservations in the conversation increased the professor's suspicions. She decided to contact Child Protective Services, despite the fact that Jason had already reached the age of majority. Investigators also interviewed Martha's former co-workers and Jason's teachers. Their testimony helped paint a more complete picture of what was going on in the Thompson household. Martha's colleagues noted her odd behavior and frequent conversations about her son that went beyond normal parental concern. Jason's teachers confirmed his social isolation and unusual attachment to his mother. An important aspect of the investigation was an analysis of the family's financial records. Detectives discovered that Martha regularly purchased expensive gifts for Jason disproportionate to their financial situation. This spending included jewelry, expensive clothing, and electronics, indicating Martha was attempting to buy her son's loyalty. Jason's medical examination, conducted as part of the investigation, revealed signs of long-term psychological distress and emotional trauma. Psychiatrists who worked with Jason diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Detectives also looked into Martha's religious background. They contacted members of the community she grew up in and learned about her conflict with the church after her husband left. This helped them understand the origins of her distorted religious beliefs, which she used to justify incest. Analysis of Martha's computer revealed a history of search queries related to incest and its religious justifications. Experts found that she was actively seeking information about biblical stories that could be interpreted as endorsing incestuous relationships. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the Thompson family's case was not just an isolated episode, but the result of a long process of manipulation and psychological abuse. Investigators amassed an extensive evidentiary base that included physical evidence, electronic data, medical reports, and witness testimony. Martha Thompson's trial began on September 10, 2022, in Redwood County District Court. The case attracted significant public and media attention given the shocking nature of the charges and the unusual religious aspects of the crime. Prosecutor Jason Harris presented the indictment. Martha Thompson was charged with sexual assault, corruption of a minor, and incest. The charge was based on evidence collected during the investigation, including email correspondence, photographs, videotapes, and Martha's diaries. Martha's defense was represented by attorney Richard Stone, an attorney known for his experience in complex criminal cases. The defense strategy was based on the argument that Martha was insane at the time of the crimes. The attorney argued that deep religious delusions and mental illness caused Martha to be unable to realize the criminal nature of her actions. The trial heard evidence from key witnesses. Professor Elizabeth Green testified about her observations of Jason's behavior in college and the suspicions that led her to contact Child Protective Services. Robert Anderson, a neighbor of the Thompson family, testified about the strange behavior he observed and the overheard conversation that prompted him to notify the police. Investigators also interviewed Martha's former co-workers and Jason's teachers. Their testimony helped paint a more complete picture of what was going on in the Thompson household. Martha's colleagues noted her odd behavior and frequent conversations about her son that went beyond normal parental concern. Jason's teachers confirmed his social isolation and unusual attachment to his mother. An important aspect of the investigation was an analysis of the family's financial records. Detectives discovered that Martha regularly purchased expensive gifts for Jason disproportionate to their financial situation. This spending included jewelry, expensive clothing, and electronics, indicating Martha was attempting to buy her son's loyalty. Jason's medical examination, conducted as part of the investigation, revealed signs of long-term psychological distress and emotional trauma. Psychiatrists who worked with Jason diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Detectives also looked into Martha's religious background. They contacted members of the community she grew up in and learned about her conflict with the church after her husband left. This helped them understand the origins of her distorted religious beliefs, which she used to justify incest. Analysis of Martha's computer revealed a history of search queries related to incest and its religious justifications. Experts found that she was actively seeking information about biblical stories that could be interpreted as endorsing incestuous relationships. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the Thompson family's case was not just an isolated episode, but the result of a long process of manipulation and psychological abuse. Investigators amassed an extensive evidentiary base that included physical evidence, electronic data, medical reports, and witness testimony. Martha Thompson's trial began on September 10, 2022, in Redwood County District Court. The case attracted significant public and media attention given the shocking nature of the charges and the unusual religious aspects of the crime. Prosecutor Jason Harris presented the indictment. Martha Thompson was charged with sexual assault, corruption of a minor, and incest. The charge was based on evidence collected during the investigation, including email correspondence, photographs, videotapes, and Martha's diaries. Martha's defense was represented by attorney Richard Stone, an attorney known for his experience in complex criminal cases. The defense strategy was based on the argument that Martha was insane at the time of the crimes. The attorney argued that deep religious delusions and mental illness caused Martha to be unable to realize the criminal nature of her actions. The trial heard evidence from key witnesses. Professor Elizabeth Green testified about her observations of Jason's behavior in college and the suspicions that led her to contact Child Protective Services. Robert Anderson, a neighbor of the Thompson family, testified about the strange behavior he observed and the overheard conversation that prompted him to notify the police. A key point in the trial was Jason's testimony. Despite his obvious emotional trauma, he found the strength to speak in court. Jason detailed his mother's years of manipulation, how she isolated him from his peers and instilled distorted ideas about normal relationships. His testimony made a strong impression on the jury and everyone in the courtroom. Psychiatric experts called by both sides provided conflicting assessments of Martha's mental state. The defense expert insisted that she had a severe mental disorder, while the prosecution expert argued that Martha was sane and aware of the wrongfulness of her actions. Martha herself also testified. She continued to insist on her innocence, claiming that she acted out of love for her son and in accordance with divine revelation. Her presentation was emotional and confused, which only increased doubts about her mental health. Prosecutor Harris emphasized the seriousness of Martha's crimes in his closing argument, focusing on the long-term psychological effects on Jason. He urged the jury to resist attempts to justify the defendant's actions on religious grounds. Attorney Stone, in his closing argument, continued to insist on Martha's insanity, urging the jury to show compassion and recommend compulsory psychiatric treatment instead of imprisonment. After a 3-week trial, the case went to the jury. It took 2 full days to deliberate on a verdict, signaling the complexity and ambiguity of the case. On October 20, 2022, the jury reached a verdict in the Martha Thompson case. After lengthy deliberations, they found her guilty on all charges, including sexual assault, corruption of a minor, and incest. The jury rejected the defense argument of insanity, finding that Martha was aware of the criminal nature of her actions. Judge Eleanor Wright set a sentencing hearing for November 3, 2022. In the 2 weeks leading up to that hearing, the court received numerous statements from various parties, including psychologists who had worked with Jason, representatives of community organizations, and experts on family violence. At the sentencing hearing, Prosecutor Harris pushed for the harshest possible punishment, emphasizing the severity of the crimes and their long-term impact on Jason's life. Attorney Stone, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, asked the court to show mercy, given Martha's psychological state and her sincere, albeit distorted, belief in the rightness of her actions. Jason also made a statement prior to sentencing. His speech was emotional and contradictory. He spoke of the pain and confusion he had experienced, his shattered childhood, and his uncertain future. In doing so, Jason expressed complex feelings for his mother, combining anger, fear, and remnants of affection. Judge Wright, in sentencing, noted the unprecedented nature of the case and the difficulty in determining a just punishment. She emphasized the need for not only punishment but also rehabilitation for both Martha and Jason. Martha Thompson was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In addition, the court ordered her to undergo intensive psychiatric therapy in a prison medical facility. Upon release, Martha will be prohibited from having contact with Jason without his explicit consent and supervision by appropriate authorities. The sentence drew mixed reactions in the community. Many considered it fair, given the severity of the offenses. Others criticized the decision as too harsh, believing that Martha needed treatment rather than a lengthy prison sentence. For Jason, the sentencing was the beginning of a long road to recovery. He continued intensive psychotherapy and began the process of reintegrating into society. The college where he was studying granted him a sabbatical and support to continue his education. The Thompson case brought attention to the problem of family violence and religious manipulation. It has catalyzed discussions on the need to improve systems for early detection and support for victims of incest. The case has been the subject of scrutiny in legal circles, particularly in the context of considering arguments about insanity in cases involving religious beliefs. It has also raised questions about the balance between punishment and rehabilitation in such complex cases. The case of Martha and Jason Thompson has left a profound mark on U.S. jurisprudence and public consciousness. It revealed a number of serious problems existing at the intersection of law, psychology, and religion, and became the cause of a wide public debate. One of the key aspects that attracted the attention of experts was the manipulative nature of Martha Thompson's actions. Psychologists noted that the case demonstrates how religious beliefs can be distorted and used to justify criminal acts. This has led to calls for increased educational programs to detect signs of psychological abuse and manipulation in families. Lawyers and human rights advocates have discussed the difficulty of enforcing laws in cases where the perpetrator appeals to religious beliefs. The Thompson case was a precedent showing that religious motives cannot justify crimes against minors and family members. Sociologists have noted that the case highlighted the problem of social isolation that can occur in closed religious communities. This has led to discussions about the need to monitor such groups more closely and to ensure access to education and social services for their members. In education, the Thompson case has prompted a review of protocols for responding to suspicious student behavior. Many educational institutions have increased training for teachers to recognize signs of domestic violence and incest. The medical community also responded to the case. New guidelines were developed for psychiatrists and psychologists to work with incest victims, especially in cases where the perpetrator used religious manipulation. For Jason Thompson, the effects of the case were long-lasting and complex. His case has been the subject of study by specialists in the rehabilitation of victims of family violence. The process of his recovery and reintegration into society has been carefully documented, allowing for the development of more effective techniques to help similar victims. The case has also influenced legislation. Several states have initiated discussions on the need to increase penalties for incest and to strengthen measures to protect children from family violence. In religious circles, the case has sparked serious debate about the limits of interpretation of sacred texts and the dangers of extremist interpretations. Many religious leaders have condemned attempts to use faith to justify criminal acts. The media also played a significant role in covering the case. Investigative journalism helped to uncover other cases of similar crimes, leading to a broader discussion of incest in society. Overall, the Martha and Jason Thompson case was a milestone in American legal practice and public life. It not only brought attention to the problem of incest and religious manipulation, but also stimulated important changes in various areas of society, from legislation to education and social work. This case continues to serve as a reminder of the need for vigilance and proactive action in protecting vulnerable members of society, especially children and adolescents.